Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to this SBR InFocus webinar. My name is Isabel Rove and I'm an Education Community Manager here at ACCA. Today, our session is designed to support your preparation for the SBR exam, and I'm very pleased to be joined by our expert tutor, Cara Barrett. Hi, Cara.
Hello there.
Before I hand over to Cara, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Firstly, you'll see a number of buttons at the bottom of your screen. There is a help icon on the left, and that provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues you might experience. There are also icons for the slides and media player. You'll need both of those during the webinar, so make sure you've selected them. We do have an attendee chat function, and this enables you to chat with your fellow webinar attendees. The icon for that's on the right-hand side, and I can see lots of you have already been saying hello and telling us where you are in the world, so that's always great to see. A list of available resources is also accessible there. The icon looks like a file symbol, and if you click on this, you'll be able to get access to all of the resources relevant to today's webinar, and that includes direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit you, and you can resize the videos as and when you need to. And if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see the visuals moving, just refresh your browser, as that usually helps. You've registered for this webinar, and that means you'll be receiving an email tomorrow with details of how you can listen to it again. So do not worry if you miss something or you join late or you have technical issues. You will be able to access the full recording afterwards. I'm going to hand over to Cara in just a second, but just to say, if you want to ask ACCA or Cara a question, then please click on the Q&A button, which is the middle icon at the bottom of your screens. Because of the volume of the questions we get, we can't guarantee that we'll respond to everyone directly, either verbally or through the Q&A inbox. But lots of the same questions come through, so hopefully the questions we share and answer will be helpful to everyone. So welcome once again for coming, and I'll pass over to you, Cara.
Great. Thank you very much, Isabel. And indeed, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, to everybody out there. Let's start by just introducing me. You might not have come across me before. I possibly haven't come across you either. So my name is Cara. I have been training students like yourselves to pass financial reporting stream exams for years and years and years now, more than 23 years there, you can see, which probably makes me very old. But I have also during that time spent quite a lot of time teaching tutors to teach you. I also work with accountancy institutes throughout the whole world, helping them to develop their learning materials, their assessment materials. So I've kind of been in this game for quite a while, really, so quite a bit of experience. What are we doing today, though, is the next question. Well, on our agenda, we are going to kick off with a little bit of a think about the examiner's reports. You may or may not have looked at those, but they are a really useful resource. So I just want to take you through why they are a useful resource and what you can pull out of them. We are then going to think about the changes to question 1, which are upcoming in the September sitting. It's our first sitting with a new style, question 1. So we'll talk a little bit about what you can expect. I'm also going to give you a sneak preview of the brand new pre-September 23 mock that became available on the practice platform yesterday, so it's ready for you to have a go at when you are ready. I will also mention, before we get to Q&As, I will also mention the Study Hub, which is another fantastic resource that's available to you that ACCA provide. We'll wrap up the session there at the end with Q's and A's. I will share really during that session questions that have come into the inbox during our hour together, and as Isabel said, we do tend to get quite a lot of questions which are very, very similar, so I will try and answer as many of those as I possibly can and hopefully tick off the question that you have particularly asked. But let's get started with the first item on our agenda, and that is the examiner's report and what you can learn from it, and in particular how you can take that forward. So I guess a good place to start, because You may not have used the examiner's reports before. You may not know where they are. A good place to start is to show you where they are. Now, what I've got there on the slide is a screenshot from the ACCA website of the SBR section of the study support resources. So hopefully you are familiar with that particular page. What you can see there is that there's a long list of boxes that you can click on to access extra things, extra useful things. And down there, I've just highlighted our examiner's reports. And if you click on that particular box, you will be able to access the examining team's reports right from the September-December 2020 hybrid sitting right through to the most recent hybrid, which is March-June 23. So remember, when the examiners release an exam for the practice platform and release the accompanying examiner's report, they always treat two sittings together. So they mush them together into what we call a hybrid sitting, hence September, December and March, June. Now, whilst I'm on this page, although it's not related to the examiner's report, I also just want to point out right down at the bottom there of the page, this particular web page, you can find access to that new mock that I have just mentioned and that I will be giving you a sneak preview of later. So brand new mock for this sitting, really, really useful resource. Back to the examiner's report though. What can you learn from it? Well, first of all, we know in SBR there are 4 questions, and the examiner's report takes each of those questions in turn to discuss. What does it discuss? What can you pull out in respect of those questions? 2 things really. First thing you can pull out are some technical pointers. So things like specific requirements of accounting standards. If the examiners note that candidates maybe didn't do very well at a particular point on a particular technical point, they will advise what the correct answer, what the correct approach is. You can also pick up what candidates do know well and what they don't do so well, what common mistakes are in terms of technical content. And that's actually really useful because if you think about the cohort sitting this exam in total, to get your pass, you really want to try and raise yourself to the top of that cohort. So that means that you need to be doing well what other people do well, but also you need to not be making those common mistakes. You need to be in a position where you think that's where people go wrong. I'm not going to do that. You can also plug knowledge gaps. So if most candidates have a knowledge gap, you can think, no, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to plug that gap now. So really useful in terms of positioning yourself in the right place. You can also pick up how particular topics are examined. Now, as well as technical pointers, the other thing you can pick up is technique pointers. Things like how to write your answer. That's a really, really important exam technique point. How to write your answer to score marks, but also particularly what not to do. Things like don't jump to a conclusion, for example, without going through the discussion points. You can also see how marks are given. And if you know how marks are given, you can make sure that you tailor your answer to that. Now, what I want to do next is just think specifically about the most recent examiner's report. So that, of course, relates to March-June 23 hybrid sitting. Now, the technical pointers within that are going to be really, really useful to you after you've had a go at the exam. So I don't want to dwell on those points in particular. What I want to do is take you through the examiner's report with a focus on those more general technique points that you can take forward. And I'm going to do that in a video. I'm going to press play on a video in a minute to just take you through that examiner's report. But what I want you to think about is how you can go back and use other examiner's reports as well to pick out similar but possibly different points. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of things that you can find and the kind of things you can take forward. So I'm going to press play on this video. Whilst the video is playing, I'm going to dart into the background. I'm going to go into that Q&A inbox and I am going to start typing some replies to questions. So if you've got a burning question, now is a brilliant time to pop it into that inbox and I'll answer as many as I possibly can. And then I'll be back with you in, I think it's about 10 minutes. So here we go with that video. Well, the March-June Examiner's Report is 15 pages long, and as we've suggested, it is laid out there by questions. So question 1, 2, 3 and 4 dealt with in order. However, before it gets into those individual questions, the report starts, if I scroll down, with some general comments, and that's where we can find our first points to take forward. And what we have here in the section that I've highlighted is actually a general shout out from the examiners for good exam technique. So what's referred to there is good time management, for example. The examiner also suggests that you don't have to do the questions in order. Question 1's actually quite tricky sometimes, and it's complex, it's longer, and also we know this sitting it's going to be new style. So why would you start with that one? Why not start with question 2, accounting and ethics, so a shorter, possibly more familiar style of question. Here the examiners also pointed out that you really need to be realistic in what you think you can achieve within the time allocation. And because you're going to be limited in time, you really need to focus your answer and really apply it to the scenario. Very, very important to avoid regurgitating any learning, any of your rote learning. Let's move on to question 1. Now, as I've said, I don't want to go into the technical detail here. It's much better that you go and sit this exam and then read that. But if we just scroll down there to the bit that I've highlighted once again, question was well answered by candidates who discussed relevant accounting standards and then applied the principles to the scenario. It's so important, and we're going to see this theme recurring throughout this report. It's so important to not only state your knowledge, but apply it to the scenario. That's how you're going to earn marks. Scrolling on again, the next requirement was an explain and calculate requirement there, and the examiners particularly pulled out that very few candidates gave explanation or discussed principles behind the calculation. It was goodwill in this case. Now remember that essentially SBR is a written exam. You must provide explanation if it is requested. That is probably where the bulk of the marks are going to be going, not for the actual calculations. Let's move on to question 2. Now, question 2 is, of course, our ethics question. Part A in this particular case was 4 marks to discuss IT and the impact on the ethical responsibilities of an accountant. So actually, that probably seems to you quite a big open question, and you might not know quite where to go with your answer. But look what the examiners said here. This is great news. There was a range of answers which were possible and acceptable. There was 1 mark for each valid discussion point. So in a question like this, the markers really do have discretion to award marks for anything that is valid. So there is not a finite list of points you must make. So don't worry, don't get bogged down worrying about which direction to take a question such as this one. Just stick to sensible points. Also highlighted on this page, this is another really important pointer in terms of exam technique. Some candidates just merge together answers to A and B. Now that is really problematic for the marker. It's not very helpful at all. In a general sense, it's really important that you signpost the marker through your script. In other words, always have a heading to identify which requirement you're answering, and if there are sub-requirements within one requirement, again, indicate which sub-requirement you are dealing with. If we just move on again, as we've said, this is the ethics question. Now, once again, the examiner in the section I've highlighted there has pulled out this idea of state and apply. So discuss the ethical principle, but actually the important thing there is applying to the scenario. So that's the second time we've seen that theme. I did say it's a recurring theme. Also important to point out the second sentence there of the first highlighted bit. Don't cut and paste the scenario into your answer and expect to get marks just for doing that. You are adding no value. That is not your own work, so just please avoid it. Professional marks obviously come into question 2. Now, when you're going for professional marks, one thing that you do have to be is really realistic in what you are suggesting, and the examiner has pulled that out there. The very final bit that I've highlighted on this page there says, don't just give a standard set of actions that an ACCA member should follow if there's an ethical issue, such as resign, call ACCA, etc. That isn't going to score you very highly. You must go back to this idea of applying to the scenario. That's what will access you those professional marks. Again, if I move on to section C, the comments on section C there, again, this is the third time we've seen this now. Rote learnt knowledge doesn't attract many marks. Don't just give definitions without applying them to the scenario. So over and over again, we're seeing this message. State what you know from the relevant standard or the code of ethics, whatever it is you're dealing with, and then apply to the scenario to access the majority of marks. Okay, what about question 3? Well, for question 3, part A was a discussion of whether it's acceptable to not record a provision in a certain circumstance. And the first thing that the examiner says, yet again, is that you do need to, as well as stating the recognition criteria of IS 37, apply to the actual scenario. So again, we're seeing that theme. But the second point I've highlighted there is also interesting, as well as answering the explicit question really, which is, as I say, is it correct not to record a liability? You should be thinking, how can I improve the quality of my answer? How can I achieve the 7 marks? And actually, what would you do in real life? You wouldn't only tell a client what they shouldn't be doing, you'd tell them what they should be doing. So considering whether to disclose a contingent liability. So the message there really is think about the number of marks available and make sure you give sufficient information, which might involve just going a little bit further than the explicit requirement. A second point to pick up from this question, a much smaller point, if I just scroll down there. In this case, it related to IS 32. It's regularly examined, but a surprising number of answers ignored this part of the question. I think the message there from the examiner is be very, very careful not to cherry pick which standards you think will come up and ignore those that you think are less relevant, because actually anything could come up in SBR. Let's move on now to question 4. Now, the examiner's report on question 4 starts off with quite the lecture on time management. And of course, the problem here, what drives this, what's driven this commentary, is the fact that so many candidates do the questions in order and never quite get round to doing question 4 or never quite get round to finishing at question 4. And of course, that seriously puts their chances of passing at risk. So the examiner's really keen to point out here that, first of all, if question 4 has professional marks attached to it, if you don't do all the requirements, you risk losing those. Secondly, you mustn't forget that it's much easier to earn the early marks in any question, grab those easy marks, rather than just keeping on going, trying to get some of the harder marks in the previous question. And then the examiner's given you a top tip there, which is to give yourself a number of minutes per mark. That will give you the amount of time you should spend on a question, and stick to it. But also, he said it's a really good idea within that time allocation to think about drawing up a plan before you start writing, because that's really going to keep you focused and help you keep on track time-wise. In terms of other points made by the examiner relating to question 4, if we just scroll down, yet again, we have this message that you should state your knowledge and then apply it to the scenario. A second point here, though, that the examiner makes is to be really careful when you're reading the scenario, because sometimes there are little clues as to what he wants you to address within your answer. So in this case, the scenario specifically referred to non-disclosure of information because it might affect competitive position and be misleading, and therefore he was expecting candidates to address that point. If I move on again, at the top of this page, yet again, we've got the idea of starting with your knowledge before applying, but just a little bit lower down in that first paragraph, a little bit of a word of warning. Don't jump to your conclusion without discussing accounting treatments. So you might know exactly what conclusion you want to reach in terms of how to account for a particular transaction, but you're not going to be able to access marks if you haven't gone through the motions of discussing alternative possibilities. If I scroll down again, this is the second time that we've seen this type of comment. Do not cut and paste chunks of the exhibit information into your answer. It's not your work. It can't score without additional commentary. Couple of extra points a little bit lower down. Again, we're seeing the state and apply approach there. And again, we are seeing this message that you really have to attempt all questions, but also all requirements within those questions. And then an extra point, really, one that we've not touched on so far. In question 4 here, there were some professional marks going. To get those, you had to focus on the specific stakeholder mentioned. That was the investor. So a good message there to take away is make sure that you pick up if there is an identified stakeholder in a scenario and make sure that you address their needs and don't consider issues that wouldn't be relevant to that particular stakeholder. Scrolling on again, the very, very last point here, we do see some requirements which do not relate to an exhibit. They are based on your knowledge, your understanding of an issue, and of course those can be done as a standalone requirement, as a standalone answer at the start before you get bogged down in the detail of the exhibits, the detail of the specific case. And sometimes doing that just helps with time management. So let's just finish by summarising the key points from that examiner's report. And I think the first 2 points there, they were mentioned over and over again. So really important. Yes, state your knowledge, but you must always apply to the scenario. Manage your time really carefully. That's going to help you to attempt all questions. But also remember, signpost your answer, help your marker out. Make sure you answer the question. So that does include explicit and implicit issues. Plan your answer, don't jump to the conclusion. And finally, please don't cut and paste exhibits into your own answer. Okay, well, that was a whistle-stop tour, of course, as I say, of that examiner's report, but really trying to pull out some of the useful things that you can take forward. One of the questions that came in, I was madly answering questions in the background whilst you watched that. One of the questions that came in was, how many of these examiner's reports should I read? And actually the answer to that, I think, is it depends on how many of the exams that they relate to you have an opportunity to have a go at, because I think the examiner's reports are most usefully read in conjunction with the exam that they relate to. And don't forget that even if you don't have 3 hours 15 minutes to set aside to do a full exam, you can just do a question. Even if you just do question 1 or question 4, whatever it may be, that's better than nothing. But it's only useful if you then move on and learn from that. And part of that learning process is looking at what the examiner has said about that particular question. So how many reports should you read? It depends on how much you can actually do in the first place, really, I think. Anyway, I did try and answer as many questions as possible. I will share some of those, as I say, with the entire wider group at the end. We have another video and I will try and get some more questions individually answered during that time. So the second video is actually going to relate to our next topic, but let's just start with some of the basics first. So changes to question 1. Question 1, or part of question 1, I should say, has a new style for the first time for the September sitting. So let's just learn a little bit about that and about the format. First thing then, what's the same? Right, there's a lot that's still the same here, so don't panic. It's still a 30 marker. It still includes group accounting. Don't forget though, although question 1 is often referred to as the groups question, it is not only groups. You are very, very likely to see other topics creeping in there: pensions, financial instruments, share-based payments, whatever they may be. So be prepared for that. It will still include some requirements that are similar style to those that you've seen previously. So things like advise on the accounting treatment, discuss, let's say, whether this investment, what type of investment this is, sub, associate, joint venture, whatever. Explain, maybe explain with calculations, something like goodwill, let's say. So very, very similar requirements to those that we've historically seen. However, one requirement, will be new style. And in conjunction with that, you will also get one new style exhibit. That new style exhibit will be a draft financial statement. It could be a full financial statement, or it could be an extract of part of a financial statement. So CSOFP, CSBLOCKY, Statement of Profit or Loss and OCI. It could be a consolidated statement of cash flows. All or part of one, remember. You will also, as well as that exhibit with the draft financial statements, you will also get your spreadsheet working area, your constructed response area, with something in it already. It will be pre-populated. What will it be pre-populated with? With the draft financial statement or extract. The extra requirement, the new style requirement, will then be something between 10 and 14 marks for you to correct or finish, or possibly both, those draft financial statements or financial statement, there will only be one, that you have been given. So quite calculative, really, not so wordy, this particular requirement. So just to give you an example, what I've done is I've dipped into the practice platform and I've done a little bit of screenshotting. So I've gone into practice exam 3, you can see there, and I have screenshotted the screen with two things open. On the left-hand side there, I have the exhibit. Exhibit 4 is an extract from the draft consolidated statement of financial position. You can see there the extract is just the equity section of that SOFP. In other questions, it could be the full thing, but here it's just the equity section. On the right-hand side of my screenshot, the second thing that I opened up was the spreadsheet response area. So the area where you actually do your answer. And what you can see if you look at the two things I've opened is that they are exactly the same. So the final exhibit will be the draft financials or financial statement, and the spreadsheet will contain exactly the same, which in effect makes that final exhibit redundant. It's there really just as a backstop, just as a safety net, but you have the content you need in the spreadsheet. So you're going to have to deal with that spreadsheet. You're going to have to complete or correct or whatever the actual financial statement. So if I just move on to my next slide, I've continued with this practice exam 3, and I have, if I just open everything there, I have, first of all, at the bottom there, screenshotted the requirement. So the requirement here, you can see it's 11 marks. I did say it will be between 10 and 14. 11 marks using the pre-populated response option. That's the spreadsheet that's already got something in it. Using that together with Exhibit 3, together with the answer you've already done to Part B, and by the way, Part B was to calculate goodwill on an acquisition of a foreign subsidiary. So with those things, adjust the equity section of the draft consolidated SOFP to prepare a corrected extract. Now, of course, the problem here is that we don't quite know what's wrong with the draft extract. So we don't quite know what we're going to have to be doing. And that's where Exhibit 3 comes in. So somewhere you're going to have to be told what's gone on in the draft financial statement so that you know what your starting point is. So I've opened up Exhibit 3 there and screenshotted again at the top of the page. And what I've done, it's a longish exhibit, but I've outlined there in the red box the bit that's relevant, the bit that's telling us what has been done. So our scenario here, by the way, is parent and a foreign sub. And we're told there that the initial draft consolidated financial statements excluded Bakelite, that's our foreign subsidiary by the way, other than to report the investment at cost in non-current assets. However, the second draft, so that's the one we're looking at now, in that one the accountant has added across all of Bakelite's income expense, asset liability and equity balances to the previous balances, but has made no consolidation adjustments in respect of the subsidiary. So all that's happened is our foreign subsidiaries, assets, liabilities, equity in the SOFP have been added across. So we know now that we are going to have to complete that consolidation. So here we're completing the consolidation. Elsewhere, you might be correcting errors that have been made and you'd be told about those errors, or you might have other issues to include. Of course, question 1, as I say, it could include pensions, financial instruments. You might just have to literally make adjustments for those and their relevant accounting. So that's what you're doing. That's the information you've got. What's your output going to look like? Well, your output, again, I've screenshotted, I've actually completed this answer for practice exam 3, and I've screenshotted it, and your output's going to look something like the spreadsheet there here. So at the very, very top, I've got what was already pre-populated, the very abbreviated there, equity section and the draft figures. That's what I was given. But you can see there that I have added a column for each adjustment that I have made to that. So here I've got a goodwill journal. I've had a goodwill impairment that I've obviously been told about. I've got an exchange difference on the goodwill that I've had to think about. I've had to give the NCI some profits, and I've had an unrealized profit. So I've got a column for each of those. Notice that I've labeled the columns so the marker knows exactly what I'm dealing with. Notice also that I have, just add down there, I have also got referenced workings underneath my main answer. And those are referenced to those columns I've just pointed out. So goodwill journal, and you can see there it's referenced to working 1, and underneath I've got working 1. Goodwill impairment, reference to working 2, I've got working 2. So as ever, I'm signposting my marker. I'll come back to why that's important in a minute, but if I just pick up the final thing there, the red box numbers, that's my corrected equity section of the SOFBI. So I have added across from the draft and I've added in my adjustments, I've come to a corrected column. Now what's important here is where the marks are going. The marks are not generally going for those corrected figures in the red boxes. The marks are generally going for the adjustments in the adjustment columns. But as well as that, there are marks for the workings. That's why it's so important to reference your workings here. You know, as you did in FR when you were doing consolidation, it was always really important to reference then. It's particularly important because, again, just like in FR, you will get own figure rule marks. And what that means, if we take the unrealized profit there, for example, what that means is if you have calculated your unrealized profit incorrectly in the workings, you will lose the working mark, but you will get the mark for putting the unrealized profit in the correct place within that equity section. So just remember that. Just remember you can access marks even if you get in a muddle in your calculations, really. Now, this kind of approach to consolidation using a spreadsheet and columns for adjustments is possibly something which is less familiar to some of you. It absolutely depends on how you approach consolidation in FR, and there are lots of ways of doing that. So what I've got now is I've just got a very, very short video just to give you a little overview, because I think it's really helpful to have an overview of the consolidation process using a spreadsheet, using this approach, which tends to be how it's done in real life, to be honest. I think it's really useful for you when approaching this new requirement. So let me go ahead and play that. It's only a very short video, and I'll dot back into those questions and keep answering them for you. So here we go. Now, I think that a really good understanding of the consolidation process is super useful in approaching this new style of requirement in question 1. So what I want to do is give you an overview of that process, which you may or may not be familiar with, depending on how you approached consolidation at the FR level, because there is, of course, more than one valid way to approach a consolidation for that particular exam. Well, you can see there that I have a really simple scenario in the red box. My parent bought 90% of the sub when its retained earnings were 70 million. The NCI is measured using the proportionate method. And then I have laid out on the left-hand side of my spreadsheet the parent's individual SOFPI and the sub's individual SOFPI. Now, in a consolidation process, the first thing that happens is, of course, that those two columns are added together. They are aggregated, like so. And in the example that we just saw in the practice exam 3, that's all that had happened. The two amounts, the balances, individual balances, had been aggregated. No further adjustments had been put through. But of course, to produce a consolidation, a number of adjustments are required. The first one of those, when we're dealing with a parent-sub relationship, is always going to relate to recognising the acquisition and recognising the goodwill. So in this example, you can see over on the right-hand side there, I've calculated goodwill based on consideration for the sub of 120 million. That came from the parent's individual SOFP. The NCI of 10, that's 10% of the net assets calculated below there, being the share capital of the sub from the sub's individual SOFP plus the retained earnings given in the red box. So overall goodwill of 30. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that calculation. You may not be as familiar with how it would feed into this spreadsheet, this type of consolidation schedule. So let me show you. The calculation in effect generates the entries there, so the consideration has to be eliminated, the sub at cost has to be eliminated for the consolidation, so minus 120. Goodwill of course has to be recognised at the 30 we've calculated. The share capital and the retained earnings of the sub at acquisition have to be eliminated, so those are my two negatives in the bottom half there. And then of course we have to recognise the NCI at 10. Now do notice that those adjustments equal one another in terms of what goes on in the top half, what goes on in the bottom half of the SOFP. And because ultimately we need it to balance, it will always equal. So when you're making these adjustments within an exam, do always take that step back and just check that you have balancing entries. So goodwill always has to be recognised when preparing a CSOFP. As long as we're not preparing this at the acquisition date and there is an NCI, a second thing that has to happen is that some of the post-acquisition profits in the sub have to be allocated to the NCI. So you can quite clearly see here that the sub's profits at the reporting date are 120 and at acquisition were 70. So we know that there's 50 in terms of post-acquisition profits. We know the NCI is 10%. So let's allocate 10% of that 50, so 5 over to the NCI, like so. So you can see that the 5 is taken out of retained earnings where it's currently sitting and instead allocated into the NCI's individual line. So those two items are very, very common. You may see many other adjustments in SBR, and of course they can get quite complex. I am keeping this simple just to give an overview of the process because I think it's helpful. One thing that's common though is intercompany balances. That's a really easy adjustment. So let's say that the parent company owes the subsidiary 15 million. And that, of course, is just eliminated by deducting 15 million from current assets and also from liabilities. There may also be an unrealised profit. So let's say in this case that the sub's been selling to the parent. There's an unrealised profit of 10 million. In your exam, of course, you're likely to have to calculate the unrealised profit. Please do it in a working. But if I just show you the entries, the 10, of course, is deducted from the inventory. And because the sub is the seller, the NCI is allocated 10% of that unrealised profit and the group is allocated in retained earnings the balance. So those are just a few adjustments that you might see. The final stage when preparing a consolidation this way is of course to add across from the bold total column to create a new consolidated column. And there it is. So as I say, I think an overview of this approach to consolidation is really going to help you with this new style of requirement in question 1 in SBR. In particular, if you have situations where an amount has been recorded incorrectly, so maybe something like goodwill, if you know how it should have been represented in the first place, it's much easier to be able to show the adjustments. Of course, that was a CSOFP. If you are producing a CSPL, or a CSBL OCI, then same approach applies. Parents column, subs column, we create a total and then consolidation adjustments are recorded. But of course the thing to remember there is that you must allocate the profits and the total comprehensive income between the parent and the NCI. And actually in this style of question, that is often where there are quite a few marks going. So finally, just to reiterate, in terms of this consolidation process and how it interacts with the new style of requirement for SBR question 1, you could in effect have to deal with a draft financial statement that's at any stage of this particular process. So it might be that we've just aggregated parent plus sub and made no further adjustments. It might be that some adjustments have gone through, but not all adjustments. It might be that all adjustments have gone through, however, they have been processed incorrectly and you are required to correct them. Okay, so as I say, that was just an overview really of the process, which if you used a 5 steps approach at FR, you might not have been aware of that, and I do think it's useful. With this new style requirement, as always, best thing you can do now is practice it, and you do have those practice exams in particular. There's a specimen exam, at least one as well, on the practice platform that you can work on, as well as other question banks that you have access to, including those on the Study Hub, which I will come to. Let's now, because time marches on, let's just very quickly think about the pre-September 23 mock. This is just a very, very brief sneak preview so that you can G yourselves up for it and get yourselves ready to do it really in the best way possible, to time, under exam conditions, so you get the most out of it. So just a brief overview of what's coming up. Question 1. We know this is the group's question, but it does tend to include other stuff. And in this case, the other stuff it includes is IFRS 9, a little bit of financial instruments, and everyone's favourite, hedging. Oh, goodness me. It also includes, in terms of the consolidation side of things, a little bit of foreign exchange, but there's also some foreign exchange that's not group related. And in terms of that new requirement, you would be working on C Splocky, completing a C Splocky. Question 2, which is labelled generally the ethics question, also includes, let's call them accounting issues, and in this case we have a little bit of leases. We have yet more IFRS 9. It does tend to crop up, this time credit losses, and we've also got a little bit of sustainability reporting, and then of course the ethics requirement, which we are very, very used to. In terms of question 3, this tends to be an accounting issues question, so various things to deal with. IAS 38 at the top there, intangibles. The 21, by the way, is a typo. It is, of course, IAS 38 on intangible assets. Yet more IFRS 9, this time financial liabilities. RPTs, related party transactions, coming into this one, and also the idea of an investment in another company. So 4 issues to talk through. Quite common, really, that type of approach to question 3. It's a great question, together with question 2, really, for the examiner to get in lots and lots of different standards, lots of different topics. Question 4 tends to be, let's call it the more unusual question on the paper. Its format varies potentially. In this case, it's got some events after the reporting period. Those are the ERPs there in the top box. And this is where you'll also see any current issues or contemporary issues, as they're now called, coming in. So those are things like accounting, maybe for cryptocurrency, or an initial coin offering has come up, or accounting for something like a natural disaster, maybe an earthquake or a pandemic. So all of those things come under the umbrella of contemporary issues. Those tend to be multidisciplinary, lots of standards coming into play there. And we've also got a little bit on integrated reporting featuring there in question 4. So this is a great mock exam, lots of coverage. So as I say, that was just a really brief introduction to this particular mock so that you can get ready, you can G yourself up, and hopefully set some time aside to do that exam properly. But let me just point out, before we get to Q's and A's, let me just point out this wonderful, wonderful study hub that ACCA has developed to support you in your final few weeks of study here. And what's available on this study hub is loads and loads of free to absolutely everybody materials. So study content, there's quizzes, there's flashcards, there's practice questions, there's revision questions, loads of fab stuff there. And as you can see there, the way to access it is via My ACCA and then My Qualifications, and go to ACCA Study Hub, and you will have loads of materials to go at. And ACCA have just produced a very short video to just tell you a bit more about that. So I will just play that now, and then we'll come back together for Q&As.
Let's take a closer look inside Study Hub, your ultimate study resource. It's a digital hub. Study Hub gives you online access to study materials from ACCA. It works like an ebook with added interactivity. It's a knowledge hub. Study chapters help to increase your understanding. A visual overview shows all the topics in each chapter, so it's easy to see how they link up. It's a revision hub. End of chapter quizzes put your knowledge to the test. The multiple choice questions are automatically marked so you can review your performance. Flashcards test your knowledge of key definitions. Check your answer against the definition on the reverse of the card. Practice questions help you prepare for your exams. You can instantly compare your answers to the suggested solutions. It's an anywhere hub. Whenever and wherever you want to work, Study Hub is there on web and mobile. It's a success hub. 79% of students said Study Hub made them more confident. 90% said they would use Study Hub again. Use Study Hub to help boost your progression. Just go to your My ACCA account and click on the Study Hub link.
Okay, fantastic resource, as I say, there for you. So please make sure you use it. So folks, we have 15 minutes left. So this is our opportunity to deal with questions. You've obviously been sending them in to me during the whole session so far. I have been typing very rapid answers, probably full of dreadful spelling mistakes. I do apologise. Back to you. And what I'd like to do now is I would like to share some of those questions with you. So they're not going to be in any particular order. I am just running through the list that I have in front of me here. If I don't get to yours in particular, I do apologise. I do have quite a lot of questions. I'll just grab out ones that I think are useful for everybody. So I think this is a great question. Tips or recommended reading resources to help with the current issues section. Do I have any tips? I absolutely do. If you haven't yet discovered it, within that SBR page on the study resources part of the ACCA website, there is a link to examiners' articles, and the examining team has written specific articles on specific topics, and some of them are not what you'd call current issues. They might be financial instruments or share-based payments, but there's quite a splattering in there on current issues. There's certainly an article on cryptocurrency. There's an article on initial coin offerings. There's articles around sustainability in there as well. Now, those are really, really useful because they give you, they're short, they're easy to digest, so they give it you in a nutshell, but they also give you the examining team's insight into the topic. And that's going to inform you a little bit more about how they might examine a topic. And actually, historically, when, for example, cryptocurrency was set as a question, the examiner did say in the examiner's report, if students had read the article out there, they'd have performed much better. So that is a fantastic resource. I do not think that you have to read outside of that. I don't think you have to go and start Googling for cryptocurrency or what have you, or accounting for initial coin offerings. But that's a fantastic resource. Quite a common issue amongst some of you out there is that this is your second time, possibly your third time of sitting this particular exam, and you're just missing your pass. You're getting maybe 48 marks, you're just missing your pass. What should you do? Well, I think this is where your technique is going to be absolutely vitally important. So ask yourself, when I've sat this exam before, have I answered or attempted to answer every single requirement? We do tend to see that candidates who fail have often not had a go at every single requirement. And remember, there are easy marks to be had, believe it or not, within every requirement. And it's your job to grab those easy marks and move on so that you do get to try each of the requirements. You do get to have a go at them all within your time, rather than really spend far too much time on, let's say, question one. That's a common problem, trying to dredge out those very last harder marks. So grab your easy marks. So that's one thing. Second thing, there are 4 professional marks in this paper. If you are missing those professional marks, then that could be the difference between a marginal fail and a marginal pass. So Look at, there are ACC resources about this. Look at the ACCA resources, how to earn professional marks. Also, now I think about it, in respect of the mock, the new mock, I have recorded some debrief videos for that new mock. And in one of those videos, I think it's the one relating to question 2, I have a slide which gives some top tips for getting those professional marks. So really work on those as well. And think about, final thing for this changing your marginal fail, think about what the examiner said in those examiner's reports. Make sure that you are very specific to scenarios. Don't just regurgitate your knowledge of a standard. Keep applying to the specific scenario. Okay, let's just scroll back up. Lots of people are asking, what shall I do in these last 3 weeks? I'm in a bit of a panic. What shall I do? Right, well, first of all, deep breath, stop panicking. Let's just try and be very, very practical about this. 3 things you need to get on top of. You need to get on top of your technical knowledge, or have a good kind of base technical knowledge. You need to be really confident in the software and use of it so that that doesn't bother you when you go into your exam, you're all over it. And you need to be good at technique. In terms of your technical knowledge, hopefully you have some little revision summaries. You might have bought flashcards or been given some sort of flashcards, revision cards. You might just take a sheet of A4 paper, not A1, that would be massive. Take a sheet of A4 paper and do yourself a revision summary for each standard or each topic. But some sort of brief revision sheets. If you're doing those sheets, do them once, don't do them over and over and over again. That's not going to help you at all. Once you've got those, the way to progress and to develop your exam technique and your software knowledge is to practice. Practice, practice, practice. Keep doing questions. Keep doing full exams if you have the capacity, if you have the time. Do them to time. Do them on the practice platform. Even if you are actually using a hard copy question from a book, you can use the empty constructed response areas on the practice platform. So you're continually getting used to using that software and getting better and quicker at it. When you have done those questions, self-mark them, debrief them, think, what did I do wrong? Learn from them. Any technical knowledge that you gain and you think, well, I didn't know that, or I'd forgotten that, add it into your revision summary or highlight it so that you're on this continuous improvement cycle. Then you're developing your knowledge, you're feeding it back into practice, you're debriefing, you're developing your knowledge, and so on. Time management, obviously a bit of an issue for some people. How on earth can I manage all the questions in the required time? You really, really just have to be extremely strict with yourself. I think for SBR, it's a 3-hour, 15-minute paper. Forget the 15 minutes. You're going to lose that really easily by just scanning the questions, seeing what's there, deciding what order to go in. So you're left with 3 hours for actual working. That's 1.8 minutes per mark. Allocate your time. Write it down on the scratch pad, on your constructed response. The mocker won't mind if it says 15 minutes or whatever. Stick to it. Appreciate that actually you might not get to write everything you want to write. It's your job to grab the easy marks within your time allocated and then move on. To help you do that, to help you focus, I would absolutely suggest planning your answers. By planning your answers, I mean, if you're, say, writing a discussion of accounting treatment, within the constructed response area, within the Word document, write down some headings as your first point. You've got a skeleton answer, and then spend the remainder of your time fleshing out each of those. Or just start with some quick bullet points and then flesh them out. So you have a skeleton, you know where you're heading, you're just going to quickly add detail. Will you lose marks if you don't reference IFRS numbers? No, absolutely not. There are no marks going whatsoever for knowing the names and numbers of standards. You can just say the relevant standard says, or you could say the standard on leases says, or whatever it may be. A very, very similar question actually has come through as well. Do I need to learn definitions? Do I need to learn recognition criteria, whatever it may be, in the standards word for word? No, you absolutely don't. As long as you can get the gist of it across, as long as you can paraphrase the gist of what the standard says, and then much more importantly for marks, apply it to the given scenario, you're absolutely fine. Do we need to learn the pro forma for consolidation and the workings off by heart, or are we given them? You are given, we've seen, you are given the pro forma for the actual statement or the bit of statement that's required of you. You are not given the pro forma for any workings. So things like the goodwill calculation, including more complex variations with, let's say, step acquisitions, you need to learn that. You need to learn exchange difference calculations. You need to learn things like what would go into retained earnings or what would go into the NCI. You need to learn that sort of thing. You are not given a helping hand, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry about that. If I just scan up, I'm just trying to pick out some of these questions are very samey, so I'm just trying to pick out slightly different ones. Question 2's ethics. Is there a theme for the other questions? I probably touched on this earlier. Question 1's largely groups based, not only groups. Question 3, accounting issues, could cover all sorts of things. That's what it tends to be anyway. Question 4, the slightly unusual question. That's where you'll find your contemporary issues or your narrative reporting, perhaps. And often in question 4 as well, there's a focus on a particular stakeholder, and you've got to get that focus. You've got to really focus on them to earn your professional marks. This is a good question. Are the new sustainability standards important? Now, those sustainability standards were only issued in June, a couple of months ago, so they haven't yet hit the syllabus in full. Awareness is fantastic, but no, they're not going to be examined in any detail. If you want to throw them into an answer very briefly, an awareness of them if they're relevant, that's fine. Most of the questions I've come across based on a listed entity, yes, they will be. That's because across the world, who applies IFRS? It tends to be only the companies that are listed on various stock exchanges across the world. It tends to be a stock exchange requirement in a lot of cases. When they say don't cut and paste exhibits into your answer, this is a fab question. Does that include structuring your answer? I tend to cut and paste the requirement into my answer to structure my questions. That is a perfect approach. I absolutely advocate, and so does the examining team advocate, cutting and pasting the requirement into your constructed response area. It creates a signpost for the marker as to what you are dealing with, and you can do it really, really quickly, much more quickly than actually typing out a heading. So please do that. When they say don't cut and paste, what they mean is don't cut and paste great detail from exhibits into your answer without adding any value to it. Scooting up again, can you use the spreadsheet for narrative answers as well if it's the same section? So let's say, for example, you had a requirement calculate and explain, and you want to do the calculation in the spreadsheet. Can you explain in the spreadsheet? You can. You're not going to be penalized at all. I think it makes life harder for you. Because we know in a spreadsheet it just keeps on writing. You've got to remember to kind of press return, if you will. It's easier to write in a Word document. What I would suggest you could do is open the two constructed response areas side by side and then work in them simultaneously. Do your calculation or part of your calculation, write about it. Do the next part of your calculation, write about it. As long as both are signposted for your marker as requirement A, let's say, it's absolutely fine. The marker will look at both. So don't worry about that. What sequence should you do your exam in? Question 1, 2, 3, 4. It's entirely up to you. You've got a few weeks left, so practice doing things in different orders. Practice having a go at question 2 first. Practice having a go at question 4 first. See how you get on. It's a personal thing, but do remember back to what the examiner said in the examiner's report. The dangerous thing with starting with question 1 is that you seriously overrun. And then you mess up questions 2, 3, and 4 for yourself. So it might be that question 1 isn't the place to start. But as I say, just have a go. Should you write in paragraphs or bullet points? Doesn't really matter. You can get marks either way, as long as they are full developed points. The danger of writing in bullets is that you forget to fully develop your point. So you must always be trying to push it further. So state your facts and then apply to the scenario. If you write in paragraphs, the danger is that you might think you start waffling, and that's not good either. So we need a happy medium. So if you're going for paragraphs or if you're going for bullets, I should say that each point, it might be say 2 or 3 lines long. So it's well developed, making some good points there. Sorry, here is Isabel, because we are 1 minute off. So I think I probably need to stop talking now. I've done as many questions as I can, but Isabel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cara. But unfortunately, we are running out of time and I do have to bring the session to a close. But this has been such a useful webinar, and I'm sure all the students attending will agree. Remember, to everyone who's registered for this webinar, that you will be getting an email tomorrow with details of how to watch the session again. And yeah, finally, all I just wanted to say was another final big thank you to Cara for all of her help and advice in this session, for everyone who's participated in the webinar, and the team, the ACCA team in the back end, helping to answer all of your questions. So on the behalf of myself, Cara, and the rest of the ACCA team, good luck for your exam and goodbye for now.
Good luck.